My name is Kari Norgard, and I have to start by saying it's been so moving to be here. It's actually difficult for me to speak. And I want to particularly begin by acknowledging that we are on Kalapuya land, and to observe the healing that I feel is happening in the words. It's a particular honor to have had Myra Johnson and listen to Kyle White last night, and thank you. So I am Kyle encouraged us last night to, I'm a settler, and to tell our histories, and thinking also about Patricia Cochran's, we need to know why you care in order to care about what you might or might not know. And so my family are from Scandinavian, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and they came mostly under conditions of some duress, but they chose to leave their homelands and come here. And I've learned a lot from Snakker norsk, or I've thought a lot about privilege, and I speak Norwegian, privilege of those peoples. There's a long history of settlement and Viking ancestry. But I also think there's a lot of traditions of humility and collectivity from my Norwegian people that I appreciate and learn from. I've learned a lot as well from both my parents. I was actually conceived just west of Bears Ears, in a place that's now inundated by Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River, and my parents spent a lot of their energy trying to prevent that dam from happening, and that has shaped my life. I'm honored to be in the room tonight with, or this afternoon, this morning even, with my partner of 24 years, Sam, who's back there filming, and he and I have worked on Klamath Dam removal since about 2003. I wish that Ron could be here. Ron Reed, I'll talk a little bit about our work. I'll do my best. I actually wanted to open with a little video of him because like so many things that can't be put in words or articulated through my white socialized being, it would be good to hear from him directly. The work that we've been doing since '03 has changed my life profoundly, and is very much a collaboration, so it's not the same not to have him here. And I just also want to acknowledge Kyle. I wouldn't be able to do, I lean on your work incredibly, and it's made an enormous difference in my ability to try to translate some of what I've been learning from the Caddo community into the academic world in a way that I hope will be valuable. And Jules, you very proud to be here with you. Jules Bacon will be defending their dissertation 1 week from today. So what I'd like to, I think the thing that makes sense in this context for me to speak about is the ways that we have a lot of talk about colonialism and settler colonialism and environmental justice and public lands. And a lot of the conversation yesterday, there's been so many important things said, which is why it's difficult for me to move from a listening to a speaking place. But that a lot of colonial violence is happening through land management, not only in the ways, we think of land theft as as something that's sort of an event, in the same way that Jennifer O'Neill's beautiful presentation showed the diminishment of the acknowledged territoriality of Northern Paiute people. But we can think about that as the ways that dramatically diminished, but we can think about that as an event of the past. And I want to talk about the ways that relationships being severed through land management practices is part of how colonialism is happening today. And the work that Ron and others have been doing in the tribe. So if I have anything useful to say here, it's because I've done a halfway decent job of listening to some of the most amazing people I've met in my life. 4 particularly significant ones are here. My colleague Ron Reed in the middle was a Caddo tribe's cultural biologist. He's a traditional dipnet fisherman. And he and I worked on putting together an altered diet study, which in about 2005, the Cook tribe were the first tribe to claim in a federal process that dams were giving them artificially high rates of diabetes. And that was very exciting work. We've been working together since on all kinds of other projects. On the right is Lee Tillman, who's the founder and director of the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources. He is amazing. I'll give you a few passages of words from these different people's work. On the left is Bill Tripp, who is, all of these people are people that you cannot begin to say in words who they are, what they are doing. But Bill Tripp is now the Deputy Director of Ecocultural Revitalization for the Karuk Tribe. He's been the lead on really exciting work about bringing fire back to the landscape. And then on top is Frank Lake, who is a research ecologist for the U.S. Forest Service, a traditional practitioner of Karuk and other descent. I actually want to explain this picture that's here. This is an event that happened. This is from the Center of Karuk Ancestral Territory. I think this was about 3 years ago. This is a pyrocumulus cloud, which is a cloud which the fire was so hot and large that it lifted up and put spot fires in like 4 different places that were dozens of miles away. And the reason I have this as an example of thinking about land management as colonial violence will become clear because most of what I talk about is fire and the ways that humans relate to fire has been a vector of settler colonialism and continues to be. So this map, you can see the little inset map, the Karuk territory is located, they're the second largest tribe in the state. They are federally recognized. It's located along the middle portion of the Klamath River, just comes up just into Oregon. So when Ron's youngest son, Ryan Reed, comes here to school in the fall, he will not have to pay out-of-state tuition. I encourage all of you, he's a remarkable young man. I hope you'll get to meet him and welcome him to our community up here. Just downstream is the Yurok Reservation. The Yuroks are the largest tribe in California, and then nearby up the Trinity River is Hupa. So I want to talk about 3 things today in terms of what I think what I felt like listening to what's been said so far, or what I understand the larger conversation about decolonizing public lands or environmental justice from indigenous perspectives as I understand it. The first is the idea that colonial violence is ongoing through land management. So I put that sort of in the title. There's a lot of talk about one of the things that settler colonial theory contributes in particular is an emphasis that colonialism is not just an event of the past, and also the ways that it is centered around land and the ways that it is sort of ongoing structure. And so through land management practices that are happening here in this valley, that are happening across, what we now think of as Oregon and in native Indian country all over the West and everywhere, through land management practices, not just about who gets to recreate in a place, but the land management practices themselves become the perpetuation of this. And so I want to draw on Jules coined the term colonial ecological violence to talk about this, and that is forthcoming in their article, Environmental Sociology. The second thing I want to talk about is just to center the importance of relationships. This has been mentioned again and again, and my own understanding of this is not as is only beginning. But the ways that relationships with other beings that in my culture are seen as not having the ability to communicate and be teachers and these kinds of things. These relationships with these other beings is central to thinking about what decolonization might mean, and then senses of responsibility. So I want to make sure people are aware of, and anyone if you haven't read this remarkable piece, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, it looks like I was working too quickly, I've got some typos in there, that when we talk about decolonization, it's a term that has been easy to throw around, and yet it has a very specific meaning. And that is, it is about reparation of indigenous land and life. And so this, the Tuck and Yang paper about decolonization is not a metaphor is a phenomenal thing to be aware of. This, in the center, is Kalamin, which is the heart of Karuk territory. Beneath there is Ishikishi Falls, which is the one fishery where people are not arrested for fishing at. I also want to, in thinking about what it means for colonial violence, I want to encourage everyone to take a look at one of Kyle White's more recent papers, and which I actually happened to be reading on Bears Ears National Monument about 3 weeks ago, and those connections. And in terms of talking about this idea of why colonialism is ongoing, as an ongoing process through land management, Dr. White says indigenous ecology physically manifests indigenous governance systems through origin, religions, cultural narratives, ways of life, political structures, and economies. Furthermore, ecologies are systematic arrangements of humans, non-human beings, animals, plants, etc., entities, spiritual, inanimate, etc., and landscapes, climate regions, boreal zones, that are conceptualized and operated purposefully to facilitate a society's capacity to survive and flourish in a particular landscape and watershed. Ways of settlement seek to incise their own ecologies required for their societies to survive and flourish in the landscapes they seek to occupy permanently. In settlement, the territories were already described with indigenous ecologies that result from indigenous practices of survival and flourishing. And so this process is happening through, I want to talk about how this process is happening through fire policy. And Yang and Yang are similarly talking about these ways that the landscape being modified is a form of violence. Within settler colonialism, the most important concern is land, water, air, saturated earth. Land is what is most valuable, contested, required. This is both because the settlers make indigenous land their new home and source of capital, and also because the disruption of indigenous relationships to land represents a profound epistemic, ontological, cosmological violence. This violence is not temporarily contained in the arrival of the settler, but is reasserted each day of occupation. So on the left is an image of a fire line. And this is a line that has been put in to stop a fire from happening. And when, for example, my colleague Frank Blake explained to me in detail how putting in, not this particular fire line, but a different one just last summer, was the erasure not only of artifacts, because it was done with a bulldozer rather than hand crews, but also the erasure of the ways that the ecological assemblages, which were actually an archive of how the land had been taken care of prior to the last 8 years of fire suppression. So that sense of all of that traditional knowledge and the ways that the land could teach how things ought to be and how things had been managed from past indigenous management. So I'm going to talk about fire. This is Kathy McCovey holding up a bear grass skirt that she has made, and on the left is Kathy participating in burning. Most of these landscapes in the West have had intensive use of fire. I don't say most, but many certainly in Credit territory, but across the West, intensive use of fire. So when yesterday we're talking a little bit about science and the ways that decolonization is also about scientific process of what we consider knowledge. Much ecological literature does not really acknowledge the indigenous management of and the importance that has had for the ways that our landscapes are today, and for the wealth and abundance which then capitalist economic systems, settlers were able to extract from land. A big part of how this has happened in many places has to do with fire exclusion. So Sam texted me a photo yesterday in front of the U of O bookstore. Was Smokey Bear Day. Did anyone see that? Smokey Bear has been one of the most profoundly successful images and campaigns in this country. And it's not unrelated to this practice of fire suppression had very explicit violence in it. This is from Orleans, California, where Credit Guianar is located in 1918. The then district ranger talking about shooting Native people for if they perform the practices that are needed to take care of the land. So fire is one of the most effective large-scale tools that you can use to there's many things that Karuk and other indigenous peoples have done to care for their living relations, but fire is one of them for managing large areas, incredibly important. And this is what a stand of trees could look like without fire. And if you go around in Kodak territory now, they're doing incredible work, but much of their land is sorely in need of fire. So fire exclusion has led to radical ecological changes. And so many species that need this land can't go there, and people can't use the land in an appropriate way. And so this exclusion of fire, this campaign of Smokey Bear, and the ways that, I should say, Kodak people have, they don't recognize actually the federal government as the federal government is the official landowner, but that is not everybody's view on the matter. But most of Kodak lands are occupied by the U.S. Forest Service, and they have a very small percentage of land. It had to do with the way their treaties were not ratified, and they were federally designated through executive order. So this is Ron. And I want to, by way of talking about relationships, is sort of the next theme. I want to emphasize and underscore. And Ron is standing at his family's land at the mouth of Tea Creek here. And some time ago, I was working on an article, and I was like, oh, I need a quote about this. So I called Ron up, and I said, can you give me a soundbite about really why fire matters or something? And I want to read you and show this quote because he just said it. And I had my little, I touched there, it's been recorded. And in this quote, he's talking about the very, very rich ways that fire exclusion affects political sovereignty. There's many, many other ways. We can talk about mental health, spiritual relationships, cultural and individual identity, and as well as people not fulfilling their responsibilities to other species. And this is again sort of moving into the second theme about what, from what I understand it, is so different about indigenous perspectives of environmental justice. It's not just about sort of being excluded from processes, not that that's not incredibly important. It's not just about physical health or contamination, not that those are incredibly important, but much deeper connections that are being eroded or damaged. So he says, without fire, the landscape changes dramatically. And in that process, the traditional foods that we need for a sustainable lifestyle become unavailable after a certain point. So what does that do to the tribal community? The reason we're going back to that landscape is no longer there. So the spiritual connection to the landscape is altered significantly. When there's no food for regalia species that we depend upon for food and fiber, when they aren't around because there's no food for them, there's no reason to go there. When we don't go back to places that we're used to, are accustomed to, part of our lifestyle is curtailed dramatically. So you have health consequences. Your mental aspect of life is severed from the spiritual relationship with the earth, with the great creator. So we're not getting the nutrition that we need, we're not getting the exercise we need, and we're not replenishing the spiritual balance that creates harmony and diversity throughout the landscape. And Bill Tripp speaks a lot about ecosystem services. It's not just about what the ecosystem gives to humans, but what humans are supposed to be doing, the services that humans are supposed to be doing for our relations in the natural world. And so thinking about all of this as being interrupted by fire policy. Touch also on this theme of responsibility in that piece that I had up from Kyle's recent work article. There's a lot, and Kyle spoke last night, some about the ways that landscapes can be managed for moral relationships. This is Lee Tillman, the rocks and the trees and the water and the air, the responsibility that I have, those are real relations. We've not forgotten that we are related and that we have a responsibility. And at the same time, we give thanks to those other spirit people for helping to subsist us and reminding them that we haven't forgotten that we owe them something too. So that renewal is renewing the bonds that exist. And so this sense of responsibility is key and drives not only people wanting to care for the land in terms of the use of fire or all the kinds of things that people are obligated to do, but also compels people to fight very, very hard and very, very creatively in all kinds of ways, including hiring and putting up with white academics. And Glenn has to go out and talk to you all. Another way that this happens is through research practices, and it was, again, incredibly wonderful to hear from the first panel in terms of those research practices. Like many indigenous tribes, the Karuk have put together their own research protocol, and they talk about and think about research as part of this bond of fixing the world. I should say, and apologize for the lengthy quote, I could use only pictures, but especially because I'm wanting for you to be exposed to other people's words, I have it up here. So in Karuk language, the verb pikyav means to repair or to fix, and so Karuk people are considered so. And another Karuk word is pikyavish, which refers to the world renewal ceremony, a set of ceremonies that Karuk and neighboring tribes continue to hold every summer. When describing the Karuk culture, tribal members often explain, "We are fix the world people." For the Karuk tribe, the center of the world is Kalamin, the place where the Klamath River and the Salmon River meet. As part of this philosophy, the Karuk tribe is working to repair and restore the complex social and ecological systems that make up the Klamath Basin. This work includes fixing some of the environmental and social damages that continue to have profound impacts on Karuk people and Karuk homeland. So this is just an excerpt from their research protocol. Thank you. Yota.
Wow.